Throw her out. The words cut through the music like something colder than sound, and Aaliyah Carter felt the grip on her arm before she fully understood what was happening. The bass still pounding through the floor beneath her sneakers, vibrating up into her chest as colored lights flickered across her face and turned the crowd into a blur of motion and shadows. But the hand on her wrist was steady, firm, unmoving, like she had already been decided, like she had already been erased. And when she turned, blinking under the neon glow, she saw the black jacket, the earpiece, the expression that didn't quite look at her but through her, and the man said it again, quieter this time. "You need to come with us." As if that made it reasonable, as if that made it right. And around them the concert didn't stop. Not yet. People still singing, still holding their phones high, still chasing a moment she had spent 3 months saving for. Picking up extra shifts, skipping meals, folding every dollar into a small envelope she kept hidden in her dresser. Because tonight mattered. Because this was supposed to be the one night where she wasn't invisible. And now her ticket crinkled in her other hand, edges soft from being checked too many times, proof that she belonged, even if no one seemed interested in seeing it. And she tried to speak, her voice catching somewhere between her ribs and her throat. "There's a mistake." But the words barely made it past the noise, swallowed by the chorus rising from the stage, and the man didn't respond, just guided her sideways through the crowd, another guard appearing on her other side, closing the space around her like walls she hadn't seen forming. And for a second everything slowed, the flashing lights stretching into long streaks, the music dulling into a distant thump, her heartbeat suddenly louder than anything else, steady but tight, like it was bracing for something it couldn't name. And she looked down at her wrist, at the contrast between her skin and his grip, not painful, not rough, just final. And that somehow made it worse, because it meant this wasn't chaos. This was decision. This was procedure. This was something practiced. And as they moved toward the edge of the arena, toward the dimmer lights near the exit, she caught fragments of voices around her, laughter, confusion, someone whispering, "What did she do?" And she wanted to answer, wanted to turn and say nothing. "I didn't do anything. I just showed up. I just wanted to be here." But the words stayed inside, heavy and unspoken, because something in the way they held her said explanations didn't matter. And near the aisle she tried once more, lifting the ticket slightly, her fingers trembling just enough to betray her calm. "I paid for this seat," she said, softer now, more to herself than to them. And one of the guards glanced at it briefly, barely a second, before looking away again, as if it confirmed something instead of correcting it. And ahead the exit doors glowed faintly under white light, a sharp contrast to the color behind her, like stepping out of a dream into something colder, something real. And just before they reached it, she heard one of them murmur into his sleeve, low enough that most people would miss it, but close enough that she didn't. "Yeah, she matches the report." And the words landed heavier than the grip on her arm, heavier than the noise fading behind her, because she didn't know what report, didn't know what they thought they saw, only that somehow, in a room filled with thousands of people, they had chosen her. The hallway swallowed the music the moment the door pushed open, and just like that the bass that had filled her chest turned into a distant pulse behind thick concrete, like a heartbeat she was no longer part of. And the air changed too, cooler, sharper, carrying the faint scent of cleaning solution and metal, the kind of smell that made everything feel official, controlled. And Aaliyah's steps slowed even as the guards kept moving, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floor as she tried to steady her breathing, tried to make sense of something that already felt decided without her. And she glanced back once, just once, catching a final flicker of stage light through the closing door, a burst of gold that disappeared as quickly as it came, like a memory she had not even had time to fully live. And when the door clicked shut behind them, the silence pressed in heavier than the noise ever had. And that was when she spoke again, quieter but firmer this time. "I think you have the wrong person." And the guard on her right did not stop walking, did not even turn his head, just adjusted the radio at his shoulder as if her voice was part of the background, like static. And they guided her down the narrow corridor where the walls seemed too close, lined with gray panels and dim overhead lights that hummed softly. And for a moment, she focused on something small, something she could hold on to, the ticket still in her hand, her thumb tracing the printed Seat number again and again like it might disappear if she stopped. Section 112. Row G, seat 14. She had memorized it the moment she bought it, whispered it to herself on the bus ride over, smiled at it in the mirror before she left her apartment, because it meant she was finally inside something bigger than her day-to-day life, something bright, something loud, something that did not ask her to explain herself. And now it felt like proof that no one wanted to read. And ahead, one of the guards slowed as they reached a security checkpoint, a metal desk with screens glowing faint blue. And another man looked up, younger, maybe mid-20s, his expression shifting from routine focus to mild confusion as he took in the scene. "What is going on?" he asked, his voice low but not cold. And the first guard responded quickly, almost rehearsed, "Flagged entry, possible duplicate scan." And the younger man frowned slightly, tapping at the keyboard in front of him as if searching for something. That did not quite line up, and Aaliyah felt a small flicker of something she had not allowed herself yet. Not hope exactly, but resistance, enough to speak again. "I bought it myself," she said, lifting the ticket just enough for the light to catch it. "I can show you the email, the receipt, everything." And this time the younger guard actually looked at it. Really looked, his eyes scanning the barcode, the printed details, his fingers pausing above the keys. And there was a moment, brief but real, where the hallway seemed to hold its breath with her. And then the radio crackled sharply at the shoulder of the older guard, a voice cutting through with urgency that did not match the calm of the corridor. "Confirm removal, subject matches system alert." And just like that, the hesitation broke, the younger guard's expression tightening as he leaned back slightly, as if stepping away from something he did not want to question. And Aaliyah felt that flicker dim again, not gone, but pushed down under something heavier, something colder, and she swallowed, her throat dry now, and asked the question that had been sitting inside her since she heard it, since the words slipped out like something she was not meant to hear. "What report are you talking about?" And this time there was no answer at all, just a glance exchanged between the two men, quick, practiced, and then forward motion again, toward another door, another threshold, as if whatever she was, whatever they thought she was, had already been decided somewhere far away from her voice. The next door opened to a wider space that felt colder in a different way, less like a hallway, and more like a place where decisions were finalized, with a long metal table against one wall, and a row of monitors casting a pale blue glow across the room. And for the first time since they had taken her out of the crowd, Aaliyah stopped walking on her own, her feet planting just slightly, as if her body needed a second to catch up with everything that had already happened. And the guard on her left noticed, turning halfway toward her with a look that was not angry but not patient either, just practiced, like he had seen this pause too many times to treat it as anything meaningful. And she took a breath, slow and careful, the kind that felt like it needed to be measured, and held up the ticket again, higher this time, steady despite the faint tremor in her fingers. "Please just scan it again," she said, her voice quiet but clear. And the younger guard from before hesitated near the desk, his eyes moving between her face and the screen as if trying to align two versions of the same story that refused to match. And for a moment it seemed like he might step forward, might reach for the scanner, might choose to check instead of assume. But then the older guard spoke first, his tone flat, controlled. "System already flagged it." And those 4 words settled into the room heavier than anything else, because they did not sound like a mistake. They sounded like a conclusion. And Aaliyah felt something shift inside her chest. Not panic, not exactly fear, but a tightening, like a door slowly closing. And she lowered the ticket just slightly, her thumb brushing over the back where the ink had faded a little from how many times she had held it. And for a brief second her mind slipped somewhere else entirely, to her small kitchen table under a dim overhead bulb, her mother sitting across from her with that same calm smile she always wore even on the hard days, sliding the ticket across the table like it was something fragile, something important. "You work too hard not to have one night that is yours," she had said, her voice soft but certain. And Aaliyah had laughed then, shaking her head, saying she could not afford it. Not really. But her mother had just tapped the ticket lightly and added, "Dreams do not wait for perfect timing." And now standing in this room that felt like it belonged to someone else's rules, that memory hit sharper than anything the guards had said, because it reminded her why she was here in the first place. And she looked up again, meeting the younger guard's eyes directly, not with anger, not with accusation, just with something steady, something that refused to disappear. "I am not trying to cause a problem," she said. "I just want to understand what you think I did." And the question lingered in the air longer than expected, stretching into a silence that made the hum of the monitors seem louder, and the younger guard shifted his weight slightly, his fingers tapping once against the edge of the desk before he finally spoke, slower this time, less certain. "There was a report," he said, glancing briefly at the screen as if it might change. "Someone flagged a ticket linked to irregular access." And he paused there, like even he did not fully believe the words he was repeating, and Aaliyah frowned slightly. The term unfamiliar, distant, like something that belonged in a system she had never touched. "That does not make sense," she said quietly, more to the room than to them. And the older guard exhaled through his nose, a small sound of impatience, stepping closer to the door on the other side, already preparing to move her again, to continue the process without interruption. And as his hand reached for the handle, his radio crackled once more, louder this time, sharper, and a different voice came through, clipped and urgent. "Hold position. Do not process removal yet." And the room stilled instantly, every movement pausing mid-action, and for the first time since this began, the certainty in the older guard's posture faltered just enough to be noticed, just enough for Aaliyah to feel that something, somewhere, had started to shift. The radio's static seemed to hang in the air a second longer than it should have, like even the signal itself was unsure about what it had just interrupted, and no one in the room moved at first, not the older guard with his hand still hovering near the door handle, not the younger one standing by the monitor with his eyes fixed on the screen, and not Aaliyah, who felt the shift before she could explain it, a subtle change in the way the room held her, as if the certainty that had surrounded her moments ago had cracked just enough to let something else in. And the older guard finally lifted his hand to his shoulder, pressing the radio button with a controlled motion that carried just a hint of tension beneath it. "Confirm," he said, his voice even but lower now, more cautious, and the reply came back clearer this time. "No static, just authority. Stand by for verification. Do not escort further." And the words landed differently than before, not like instructions to remove but instructions to wait. And waiting was something none of them had planned for. And the older guard exhaled slowly, stepping back from the door, as if the space itself had shifted its rules. And for the first time since this began, no one was guiding Aaliyah anywhere. No one was deciding her next step, and she stayed where she was, her hand still holding the ticket, though now it felt less like a defense and more like something grounding her, something real in a moment that had started to feel unreal. And the younger guard leaned closer to the monitor, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard, pulling up screens, cross-checking details, his expression tightening in concentration, and the soft clicking of keys filled the silence that followed, a different kind of rhythm than the music she had left behind, more precise, more deliberate. And Aaliyah watched him without speaking, her eyes tracing the way his posture changed, the way his shoulders stiffened slightly as something on the screen caught his attention, and he paused, just for a second, before glancing at the older guard, a look that was not confident anymore, not certain, but questioning. And that look said more than any explanation could, and the older guard stepped closer, his presence filling the space beside the desk as he looked down at the monitor, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as his eyes scanned whatever had appeared. And Aaliyah felt that small flicker inside her chest return, stronger now, not quite hope, but something close, something that pushed back against the weight she had been carrying since the moment they touched her arm, and she shifted her grip on the ticket, her fingers steadying as she spoke again, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. "I told you there was a mistake, and this time." No one dismissed it. No one brushed past it like background noise, and the younger guard nodded slowly, almost to himself, as if confirming something he had not expected to find. "The barcode is valid," he said, his voice careful, measured. "It was scanned once at entry, no duplication." And the older guard frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "Then why was she flagged?" he asked, more to the system than to anyone in the room. And the younger guard hesitated again, scrolling through another layer of information, deeper this time, where the details became more specific, more personal. And when he spoke next, His voice carried something new, something uncertain. "It was not the ticket," he said, glancing briefly at Aaliyah before looking back at the monitor. "It was her." And the words settled heavily, sharper than anything before, because it was no longer about a barcode or a system error. It was about identity, about something tied to her name, her presence. Something she had not been given a chance to understand. And Aaliyah felt her breath catch slightly, her mind searching for something, anything that could explain it, but finding nothing except the echo of that sentence. And the older guard straightened slightly, his posture shifting again, less certain now, less controlled. "Explain," he said, and the younger guard swallowed once, his eyes scanning the final line on the screen. "There was a manual flag added before the event," he said slowly. "High priority review." And he paused there, as if the next part did not sit right even as he read it. And then he added, quieter this time, "No reason listed." And the room fell into silence again. But this time it was not the kind that erased her. It was the kind that made space for something else, something unresolved, something that no longer fit the simple explanation they had started with. And for the first time, since she was pulled from her seat, Aaliyah was no longer just being moved through a process. She was standing at the center of a question none of them were ready to answer. The silence that followed did not feel empty anymore. It felt heavy with something unfinished, like a question that had been asked but not answered. And Aaliyah stood there with the ticket still in her hand, her fingers no longer trembling but holding it steady, almost firmly now, as if the small piece of paper had become something more than proof, something that anchored her in a moment that had tried to move past her too quickly. And she looked at the two men in front of her, really looked. This time, at the way the older guard's shoulders had lost that rigid certainty, at the way the younger one kept glancing between the screen and her face like he was trying to reconcile two versions of reality that did not fit together. And for the first time since this began, she felt something shift inside herself too. Not fear, not confusion, but clarity, quiet and steady. And she spoke again, her voice calm but grounded in something deeper now. "So you stopped me because of a name on a screen, not because of anything I did." And neither of them answered right away. And that silence said enough. And the older guard finally exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand along his jaw as if trying to reset the situation back into something familiar, something controllable. But it did not quite work, because the certainty was gone, replaced by something less defined, something that did not follow the usual script. And the younger guard shifted slightly, his voice lower now, almost careful. "It was marked high priority," he said, as if that explained it, as if that justified the way everything had unfolded. But even he did not sound convinced anymore. And Aaliyah nodded once, a small motion that carried more understanding than agreement. And she glanced down briefly at the back of the ticket, at the faded ink that had once felt like a simple message and now felt like something stronger, something that refused to be erased by a system that did not know her. And when she looked up again, her eyes were steady, not pleading, not defensive, just present. Then, "Maybe the system is wrong," she said quietly, and the words did not echo, they did not demand attention, but they settled into the room with a weight that was impossible to ignore. And the older guard looked at her then, really looked, for the first time not as a situation to manage, but as a person standing in front of him. And there was a flicker there, brief but real, something like doubt turning into recognition. And before he could respond, the radio crackled again, sharper this time, carrying a different tone, one that cut through the room with urgency that none of them could ignore. "We need confirmation immediately," the voice said. "The artist has paused the set." And everything changed in that moment. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in the way the air itself seemed to tighten, like the ripple of something larger reaching them from beyond the walls. And the younger guard's eyes widened slightly, his attention snapping back to the monitor as if searching for an explanation that matched what he had just heard. Paused. He repeated under his breath, almost in disbelief, because nothing stopped a show like this, not for something small, not for something routine. And the older guard straightened instinctively, his posture shifting back into something closer to control. But this time it felt different, more uncertain, more aware of the weight of what was unfolding. And Aaliyah felt it too, that distant change, even without seeing it, even without hearing the music directly. She felt the absence of it, the way the silence behind the walls carried something new, something unexpected, and she did not move, did not speak, just stood there with the ticket in her hand, her breathing steady, her presence no longer something being pushed aside, but something that had begun to pull the world's attention back toward her. And in that quiet, suspended moment, it became clear that whatever had started as a simple removal had turned into something else entirely, something none of them could walk away from as easily as they had planned. The words echoed in Aaliyah's mind long after the radio went quiet. The artist has paused the set, and for a moment she did not fully understand what that meant, not in a logical sense but in a real one, because a show like this did not stop, not for confusion, not for mistakes, not for someone like her. And yet the silence beyond the walls had changed. It carried weight now, attention, thousands of people waiting without knowing why. And she felt it in the way the room shifted again, in the way both guards straightened just slightly, their focus no longer fixed only on her, but on something larger unfolding outside. And the younger guard turned back to the monitor quickly, pulling up another screen, his movements faster now, less routine, more urgent, while the older guard pressed his radio again, his voice lower but edged with something new. Control, confirm reason for pause. And the reply came almost immediately, sharper, more direct. Performer requested halt, asking about an incident near section 112. And the number landed in the air like a marker, precise and undeniable. And Aaliyah felt her breath catch just slightly, her eyes dropping to the ticket in her hand. The same number printed clearly, the same seat she had memorized. And for a second everything aligned in a way that felt almost unreal, as if the moment she had been pushed out of had somehow reached back for her. And the younger guard looked up from the screen, his expression no longer uncertain but unsettled. That is her section, he said quietly, and the older guard's jaw tightened again. But this time it was not from control, it was from pressure, from the realization that whatever this situation was, it had moved beyond their hands, beyond their quiet corridor and controlled procedures. And Aaliyah stood still, her heart steady but louder now in her chest, not racing, not panicked, just present, aware. And she spoke again, softer than before, but carrying further in the silence. I told you I was supposed to be there. And no one interrupted her this time, no one dismissed the words, because now they were not just hers. They were connected to something happening outside, something visible, something public. And the older guard exhaled slowly, lowering his hand from the radio, as if the weight of it had changed, and he looked at her again, longer this time, really seeing her, not as a flagged entry, not as a line in a system, but as the person tied to the disruption echoing through the arena. And there was something else in his expression now, something quieter, something closer to reconsideration, and the younger guard spoke again, almost to himself. There is no supporting detail on the flag, no incident report, nothing. And he shook his head slightly, like the absence of information was louder than anything they had seen so far. And Aaliyah felt that shift inside her settle into something steadier, something grounded, not victory, not relief, just the simple, undeniable sense that the story they had placed on her was beginning to fall apart. And beyond the walls the silence held, stretching across thousands of people, across the stage lights and the empty microphone. And in that pause, in that space where everything had stopped, it became clear that this moment was no longer contained in this room. It had grown, it had reached outward, and somehow, without raising her voice, without forcing her way back, Aaliyah had become the center of it. The room did not move, but everything inside it felt like it had shifted into a different gravity, one where every second stretched just a little longer, where every sound carried further than it should. And Aaliyah could feel it in the quiet hum of the monitors, in the faint buzz of the overhead lights, in the way both guards seemed to be waiting for something they could not control anymore. And she stood there with her shoulders relaxed, but her posture steady, not shrinking, not stepping back, just holding her place in a space that had tried to move her out of it. And the older guard pressed his radio again, slower this time, as if choosing his words more carefully. "We need clarification on the incident," he said. And there was a pause before the response came, a longer one than before, filled with distant noise that sounded like movement, like voices layered over each other. And then the reply broke through, sharper, more focused. "Performer is asking why a guest from section 112 was removed. Says he saw it happen. and the words landed differently this time. Not just information but attention, direct and undeniable. And Aaliyah felt something in her chest tighten and then steady again, not from fear, but from the realization that this was no longer hidden, no longer contained in a hallway or a system screen. It had been seen. And that changed everything. And the younger guard looked up quickly, his eyes flicking toward her, and then back to the monitor as if trying to confirm what he had just heard. He saw it. He repeated quietly, almost to himself, and the older guard did not respond right away, his expression shifting through something more complex than before, something that looked like calculation mixed with uncertainty, and for a moment no one spoke, and in that silence Aaliyah became aware of something small but grounding, the sound of her own breathing, slow and even, the way her fingers rested against the ticket without gripping it too tightly anymore, the way her feet felt steady against the floor, as if she had finally found balance in a moment that had tried to tilt her out of place, and she glanced briefly toward the closed door, imagining the stage beyond it, the lights, the crowd, the sudden stillness that had replaced music, and she wondered what it looked like from there, what it felt like for thousands of people to stop at once. And then the younger guard spoke. Again, his voice lower now, more careful. "There is no justification logged for the removal," he said, scrolling through the system again as if hoping something would appear to fix it. "No behavioral flag, no duplicate scan, nothing that supports this." And the absence of explanation seemed to echo louder than any accusation had earlier, and the older guard exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly, as if the weight of certainty had been replaced by the weight of doubt, and he finally looked at Aaliyah in a way that held no dismissal, no assumption, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had gone wrong, and she met his gaze without hesitation, not challenging, not defensive, just present, and after a moment she spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "You did not ask me anything before you decided." And the sentence was simple, almost gentle, but it settled into the space with a clarity that could not be ignored, and neither man responded immediately, because there was nothing to correct in it, nothing to argue, and the radio crackled once more, louder this time, carrying a tone that felt closer, more urgent. "Stand by. Performer is requesting direct update from security." And the words shifted the room again, pulling everything tighter, sharper, and Aaliyah felt it, that subtle pull of something approaching, something that was no longer distant or indirect, and in that moment, standing under the cold light with the quiet hum around her, she realized that the story was no longer being written without her. It was turning, slowly but clearly, and for the first time since she was pulled from her seat, she was not trying to get back to where she belonged. She was already standing in it. The radio did not crackle this time. It held a steady open line, like someone on the other end was no longer passing messages, but listening, waiting, and the older guard lifted it slowly toward his mouth without speaking right away, his hesitation no longer hidden behind routine, and Aaliyah could see it clearly now, the shift from certainty to something far more fragile. And beyond the closed door the silence of the arena stretched wider, thicker, pressing against the walls as if it could leak through at any moment. And then a new voice broke through the line, not rushed, not distorted, but calm and unmistakably direct. "This is Elias Reed." And even in the small security room the name carried weight, not because of volume, but because of recognition, because everyone in that building knew who was standing on that stage, holding thousands of people in a pause that was no longer about music. And the younger guard straightened immediately, his fingers hovering over the keyboard without touching it, while the older guard answered with a tone that had lost its earlier firmness. "Yes, sir." And there was a brief silence before the voice continued, measured and clear. "I saw a young woman being escorted out from section 112. And Aaliyah felt the words settle into the space like a spotlight turning toward her without light. Just presence, just acknowledgement. "Can you tell me why?" he asked. And it was not an accusation, not yet, but it was something more difficult to answer, because it required truth, not procedure. And the older guard glanced at the monitor, then at Aaliyah, and for the first time since this began, he did not have a script to follow. "We received a flag," he said carefully. "Potential issue with ticket validation." And even as he spoke, the explanation sounded thinner than before, like something already unraveling. And the voice on the radio did not respond immediately, the pause stretching long enough to feel intentional, like space given for reconsideration, and then it came again, quieter but firmer. Did you verify it with her? And the question hung in the air, simple and direct, cutting through layers of assumption without raising its volume. And the older guard's jaw tightened slightly, but not in defense, more in recognition, and he did not answer right away, because the truth was already visible in the room. In the untouched ticket still in Aaliyah's hand, in the absence of any record. On the screen, in the silence that followed the question, and the younger guard looked down, his voice almost a whisper, "No, sir." And that was it. No explanation, no justification, just the absence of something that should have been there. And Aaliyah felt a quiet shift inside her. Not triumph, not relief, just a steady warmth spreading through the tightness that had been sitting in her chest, because for the first time, someone had asked the question that mattered, and had waited for the real answer. And on the other end of the line, the voice of Elias Reed exhaled softly, not frustration, not anger, just something heavier, something human. "Bring her back," he said, and the words were not loud, not dramatic, but they carried a finality that filled the room more completely than any raised voice could have. And the older guard lowered the radio slowly, his shoulders dropping in a way that felt less like defeat and more like acceptance. And he looked at Aaliyah again, this time, without distance, without the invisible barrier that had stood between them before. And there was a moment, small but undeniable, where everything paused once more, not because of confusion, but because something had been corrected. And Aaliyah stood there under the steady light, her grip on the ticket relaxed, her breathing even, and she realized that nothing about her had changed, not her voice, not her presence, not her worth, only the way it had finally been seen. The door opened without urgency, but the air changed the moment it did, as if the silence from the arena had finally found its way inside, and Aaliyah felt it before she even took a step, that subtle shift from being contained to being seen. And the older guard moved slightly to the side, not guiding her this time, not directing, just making space, and that difference was small but unmistakable, and she stepped forward on her own, her sneakers quiet against the floor, the ticket still resting loosely between her fingers, no longer proof she had to defend, but something that simply was. And as she walked down the narrow corridor, the sound grew clearer, not music, but something larger, the collective murmur of thousands of voices waiting, wondering, held in a moment they did not expect, and each step carried her closer to it, closer to the place she had been removed from. But it did not feel the same now, because she was not returning as someone pushed aside, she was returning as someone acknowledged. And the younger guard walked a few steps behind her, not speaking, his earlier confidence replaced with a quiet attentiveness, while the older guard stayed near the door, watching them go, his posture still, reflective, as if replaying the moment in his mind. And when Aaliyah reached the edge of the corridor where it opened toward the seating area, the light changed again, warmer now, brighter, spilling across the floor in wide beams from the stage, and she paused just slightly, not out of hesitation but to take in the shift, the way the space felt different, like stepping into something that had been waiting. And then she heard it clearly for the first time, the voice from the stage, steady and present, not performing, not singing, just speaking. "Sometimes we miss things," Elias Reed said, his tone calm, but carrying across the entire arena. "Sometimes we make decisions too fast." And the crowd responded with a low ripple of sound, not loud, not chaotic, just attentive, listening. And Aaliyah felt those words settle around her, not directed only at her, but including her, holding space for what had happened without turning it into something harsh or unforgiving. And she stepped forward again, moving into the aisle, and people nearby turned their heads, their expressions shifting from curiosity to recognition, small nods, quiet glances, nothing overwhelming, just an awareness passing from one person to another, and it reached her gently, without pressure, without expectation. And on stage Elias Reed took a small step closer to the edge, the spotlight catching the outline of his figure as he looked out over the crowd, and then toward the section where she had been sitting, and for a brief moment it felt like the distance between them disappeared, not physically, but in attention, in intention, and Aaliyah could feel it, that simple, powerful act of being seen in a space that had almost erased her, and she made her way back to her seat, each step steady, unhurried, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even, and when she reached it, she paused again, looking down at the place she had left behind, still empty, still waiting, and she sat, gently, without ceremony, and the moment settled. Around her like a quiet return, and on stage the music had not started yet, the pause still held, but it no longer felt uncertain, it felt intentional, like something had been acknowledged, something had been corrected, and in that stillness, before the first note returned, Aaliyah realized that the night had changed, not because of what had been taken from her, but because of what had been given back, something simple, something powerful, the space to exist exactly where she was meant to be. The first note did not come immediately, and that delay held meaning, as if the music itself understood that something more important had just happened, and Aaliyah sat still in her seat, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her ticket now tucked safely into her pocket. No longer something she needed to prove, and the warmth of the stage lights reached her from a distance, soft against her skin, steady and present, while around her the crowd remained unusually quiet, not restless, not impatient, but aware, like thousands of people sharing a moment they did not fully understand but could feel. And on stage Elias Reed stood with the microphone lowered slightly, his gaze moving across the audience, not scanning but searching, and there was a subtle shift in his posture, something less like a performer and more like a person standing in front of other people. And when he finally spoke again, his voice carried without effort, calm and grounded. "We move fast sometimes," he said, the words simple but deliberate. "And when we do, we can forget to see each other clearly." And the arena held that sentence in silence, letting it settle, letting it land, and Aaliyah felt it reach her not as an explanation but as an acknowledgement, something that did not erase what happened but did not ignore it either. And a few rows away someone nodded slightly, another person lowered their phone, and the energy in the room shifted again, softer now, more connected, and Aaliyah exhaled slowly, a breath she had been holding without realizing, her shoulders easing just enough to feel the difference. And for the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to simply be part of the moment, not separate from it, not questioned within it, just present. And behind her, a quiet voice spoke, hesitant but sincere. "Are you okay?" And she turned slightly to see a woman leaning forward from the row behind, her expression open, concerned without being intrusive, and Aaliyah nodded gently, a small smile forming without force. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, and it was the truth, not because nothing had happened, but because something had shifted in a way that gave her back more than it took. And the woman returned the smile, sitting back again, the connection brief, but real. And on stage Elias Reed lifted the microphone again, pausing just a moment, longer before the music resumed, and when it did, it came in softer than before, the opening chords slower, more intentional, as if the performance itself had adjusted to the weight of the moment, and the crowd responded gradually, not with sudden cheers but with a growing warmth, a shared understanding that something had been recognized and corrected. And Aaliyah felt the rhythm return beneath her feet, the bass steady and grounding. But it felt different now, less like escape and more like belonging. And as the lights moved across the arena, catching faces, hands, small gestures, she realized that the moment in the corridor had not disappeared. It had followed her here, transformed, visible in the way people looked at each other a little longer, in the way the space felt less divided. And somewhere near the edge of the stage, a member of the security team stood still, watching the crowd, his posture quieter than before, reflective, and though he did not look directly at her, there was a subtle awareness in the way he held himself, as if he too understood that something had changed, not just in the situation, but in him. And Aaliyah leaned back slightly in her seat, letting the music move through her, her heartbeat no longer tight, but steady and open. And in that moment, surrounded by sound and light and thousands of strangers who no longer felt distant, she realized that being seen was not always loud. Sometimes it arrived in silence, in pauses, in the choice to stop and look again, and that was what had turned everything. The music rose and settled into a steady rhythm, but something in the air remained different, like a quiet awareness that refused to fade back into noise. And Aaliyah felt it in the way people moved around her, in the way conversations softened instead of swelling, in the way glances lingered just a second longer before turning away, and she let herself breathe in that space, her shoulders loose, her posture no longer guarded. And for a while she simply listened, letting the sound wrap around her without needing to escape into it. And then, between songs, when the lights dimmed slightly and the crowd shifted again, she saw him, the older guard from the corridor, standing at the edge of the section, not in the center of attention, not moving with authority, just there, watching. And for a moment she thought he might pass by without stopping, that the distance between what happened and what followed would remain unspoken. But he did not move on. Instead, he took a step closer, then another, careful, measured, like someone approaching a moment they could not undo but still needed to face. And when he reached her row, he paused, not stepping into her space, just close enough to be heard without raising his voice. And Aaliyah turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes again, and this time there was no barrier in them, no assumption, only something quieter, heavier. And he spoke, his tone low and steady. "I should have asked you." And the sentence was simple, without explanation, without excuse, and it landed with more weight than anything louder could have, because it carried recognition. And Aaliyah held his gaze for a second, letting the words settle, feeling the absence of defensiveness in them. And she nodded once, not to dismiss it, not to minimize it, but to acknowledge that it had been said, that it mattered. And for a brief moment neither of them spoke again, the music from the stage filling the space between them, steady and present. And then she answered, her voice calm, even, "Yes, you should have." And there was no edge in it, no attempt to return harm for harm, just truth, clear and unshaken. And something in his posture shifted at that, not collapsing, not retreating, but grounding, as if the honesty had given him something to stand on rather than something to defend against. And he nodded slightly, a small movement that carried more meaning than apology alone, and stepped back, not turning away immediately, just giving the moment space to exist without forcing it further. And as he moved toward the aisle again, Aaliyah felt a quiet release inside her, not because everything had been fixed, but because something real had been acknowledged without being hidden or softened. And she turned her attention back to the stage, where Elias Reed had begun the next song, his voice filling the arena with a warmth that felt deeper now, layered with the moment that had just passed. And the crowd responded, not just with sound but with presence, with a shared understanding that something human had unfolded among them. And Aaliyah let herself lean back slightly, the rhythm steady beneath her heartbeat matching it without tension. And she realized that choosing not to harden in that moment, choosing not to close herself off, had not made her smaller. It had allowed the moment to expand, to become something more than what it started as. And as the lights moved across the arena once more, catching faces and hands and quiet expressions, she understood that this was not about being right or wrong, not about winning or losing. It was about what happened after, about whether someone chose to see, to listen, to change. And in that space, in that choice, something had shifted in a way that would not easily disappear. The night moved forward, but it did not rush. It unfolded, slower now, like every moment had learned to carry a little more meaning than before. And Aaliyah felt it in the way the music settled deeper into the room, in the way each note seemed to hold space instead of just filling it. And she sat there with her hands resting loosely, her body no longer tense, her presence no longer questioned, just part of the rhythm that moved through thousands of people at once. And on stage Elias Reed stepped closer to the microphone again, not between songs this time, but within one, his voice softening slightly as the instruments lowered behind him, creating a space where his words could land without resistance. And he looked out over the crowd, not searching anymore, just seeing. And he spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough that it carried to every corner of the arena. "We all deserve to be where we belong," he said. And the sentence did not feel like a performance. It felt like something offered, something placed gently into the space for anyone who needed it. And Aaliyah felt it reach her without force, settling somewhere quiet inside her, not changing her, but confirming something she already knew, something she had held on to even when it was not reflected back to her. And around her the crowd responded in a way that was different from applause, softer, a wave of understanding that moved without needing to be loud. and she glanced around briefly, noticing small moments, a hand resting on a shoulder, someone nodding to a stranger. A quiet smile exchanged between people who had not known each other an hour ago, and it felt like the entire room had shifted just slightly towards something more aware, more human. And near the aisle the older guard remained, not watching with authority anymore, but with a kind of stillness that suggested reflection, his posture no longer rigid, his gaze no longer scanning for problems, but resting on the scene in front of him. And for a moment his eyes met Aaliyah's again, and there was no need for words this time. No need to repeat what had already been said, because something had already changed in the space between them, something that did not require reinforcement, and she gave a small nod, not as forgiveness declared, not as closure defined, but as acknowledgement, as a quiet acceptance that the moment had moved forward without being denied, and he returned it just as simply, and then looked back toward the stage, and the music rose again, fuller this time, carrying the weight of what had been spoken without losing its energy. And Aaliyah let herself lean into it, her foot tapping lightly against the floor, her breathing matching the rhythm, and she realized that the feeling in her chest now was not just relief, it was something steadier, something that stayed, a sense of being anchored in her own place without needing anyone else to validate it. And as the lights swept across the arena once more, catching faces, lifting shadows, creating brief flashes of connection between strangers, she understood that the moment earlier had not just been about her. It had rippled outward, touching people in ways that might not even be visible, small shifts in how they would see the next person, how they might pause before deciding, how they might choose to ask instead of assume. And that was not something loud, not something that would be announced, but it was there, moving quietly through the space. And as the song carried on and the crowd began to rise with it, their voices joining in again, Aaliyah stood too, not because she needed to reclaim anything, but because she was already part of it, fully, undeniably, exactly where she was meant to be, and this time, nothing in the room suggested otherwise. The final song did not end with a burst of sound. It softened, gradually, like a heartbeat slowing after something intense has passed, and the lights dimmed just enough to turn the arena into a field of quiet silhouettes. Thousands of people still standing, still present, but no longer loud, no longer chasing the moment, just holding it. And Aaliyah stood among them, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing steady, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt completely her own. And for a second she closed her eyes, not to escape but to feel it more clearly, the warmth in the air, the faint vibration still lingering in the floor, the soft echo of voices fading into something calmer. And when she opened them again, the stage was no longer the center of everything. It was just part of the space, and what mattered now was quieter, closer, woven into the way people began to gather their things slowly, the way they spoke in softer tones, the way they moved with a kind of awareness that had not been there before. And Aaliyah reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the edge of the ticket, still there, still real, but no longer something she needed to hold on to tightly, and she let it rest there, her hand falling back to her side as she took a small step forward with the crowd, not pushed, not guided, just moving naturally. And near the aisle she saw the older guard one last time, standing in the same place but different somehow, his posture no longer defined by authority but by something quieter, something reflective. And as people passed by him, he met their eyes more often, nodding slightly, present in a way that suggested he was seeing each person more clearly than before. And when Aaliyah approached, their eyes met again, and this time there was no weight between them, no unfinished moment, just a simple recognition. And he stepped slightly to the side, not as a gesture of control, but of respect, creating space without needing to announce it. And she walked past him without hesitation, her steps light, grounded, and as she moved toward the exit, the cool air from outside drifted in through the open doors, brushing against her skin, carrying the faint scent of the night. And she paused just briefly at the threshold, looking out at the city lights stretching into the distance, steady and quiet. And behind her the arena hummed softly with the end of something that had mattered, and in front of her the night waited, unchanged but somehow different. And she took a breath, deep and unforced, feeling it fill her completely. And then she stepped forward, out into the open air, where nothing marked her as someone who had been stopped, questioned, or removed. Only as someone who had stood, who had remained, who had been seen, and the noise of the crowd behind her faded gradually as she walked, replaced by the distant sound of traffic, the soft rhythm of footsteps on pavement, the quiet hum of a city that did not know her story but did not need to, because she carried it with her, not as something heavy, not as something that defined her, but as something that had revealed itself and then settled, and as she moved down the sidewalk under the glow of streetlights, her reflection briefly catching in a glass window, she did not look away, she did not question it. She simply kept walking, steady and sure, and the night wrapped around her without resistance, without judgment, just space, just air, just the quiet understanding that nothing about her needed to change for her to belong. And somewhere behind her, in a place filled with light and sound and thousands of people, something had shifted, not loudly, not permanently for everyone, but enough to matter, enough to stay. And as her footsteps carried her farther into the calm of the night, there was no need for anything more to be said, because the moment had already done its work, quietly, completely, and in the end, she did not take anything from that night except what had always been